The following program was recorded at ARC Advisory Group's annual World Industry Forum in Orlando, Florida. I'm pleased to welcome Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, Russell Goodman.
Joining us to explore best practices for a demand-driven supply chain is Tom Knight, founder and CEO of Invistics. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Russell.
Tom, for any viewer that may not be entirely familiar with Invistics, what is it? What does it do?
We provide consulting services with supporting software to help supply chain managers implement demand-driven inventory replenishment and help find the right levels of inventory for their supply chain.
Well, I would imagine that you are on top of supply chain challenges that manufacturers are facing these days. So what are some of those?
Well, these are tough times. We've got global competition that's really nipping at our heels, and what we're seeing in particular that's challenging for manufacturing companies is their markets are forcing them to introduce more and more variety of products, more flavors, more sizes, more packaging configurations, and product life cycles are getting so short that they're having to constantly innovate and introduce new products. It's great for the customer because they have great choice, but from the manufacturer's perspective, it's putting a lot of stress on manufacturing factories and supply chains. Plants that used to make just a few products are now faced with hundreds, sometimes thousands of different products running across shared equipment with a lot of variability in the product mix they see month to month and all the challenges that come along with that. So finding innovative ways for them to respond to the market's demand and be able to position the right inventory at the right time is becoming more complicated with more products that they're producing.
As you're working with these companies, what do you see the leading supply chain executives doing to meet these challenges?
The key best practice that we're seeing is a transition from a forecast-driven push approach to more of a demand-driven pull approach. Historically, large manufacturers have used MRP, material requirements planning systems. They'll do their best to forecast demand, and then they'll put that demand into the factory, guessing as to what's going to sell. That push approach often leads to more inventory than you need for most products, and not enough for the rest. Whereas with best practices we're seeing, companies are transitioning from that push approach to more of a demand-driven pull approach. And in this, they're borrowing techniques from lean manufacturing so that you're sure to only produce what it is your customer's demanding. If you're replenishing finished goods, for example, you let actual consumption tell you what your factory should replenish or what your distribution center should stock. That transition from forecast-driven push to a demand-driven pull is really helping manufacturers to see what their customers are ordering faster. They can react to changing trends or fashion or whatever it is that's going to allow them to position the product their customers need based on actual consumption instead of what they forecasted demand would be.
Well, itemize for us, if you will, what are the benefits that a company is going to receive if it implements the kind of pull technology that you're talking about?
Well, there's several. The one we see the most often is some very large reductions in working capital so that companies don't have to invest so much in inventory throughout the supply chain. They're not going to guess what to produce based on the forecast. They're going to base their production on what's actually been consumed. Typically, when companies implement these pull approaches, they're able to not only see large reductions in working capital, but their customer service improves, which is a little counterintuitive. But when we see the transition from push to pull, we usually see that most of the time, companies have too much inventory in most of their products, which means they have extra storage space, they have extra working capital that's not adding any value to them, to their customer. Unfortunately, at the same time, they have other products with not enough inventory. And that's the worst of both worlds because they're having to expedite shipments, pay additional handling, perhaps penalties to a customer who's irate because they've delivered late. The biggest benefit with these pull approaches is you reduce the excess inventory in the first category of products Take some of that money and invest it in those products that don't have enough inventory. And when you're done, you have the right level of inventory with happier customers.
We've talked about some of these beneficial changes. Let's talk specifically about the technologies. What technologies have you seen to support the kind of changes that you've been mentioning?
What we're seeing a lot of leading companies do is take data they already have, data that's in their ERP system, or maybe their shop floor data collection systems like MES, and they take that data and they put a layer of analytics on top of it that give them better visibility for pull. Signals that tell them, for example, we're selling double or triple the forecast of a particular product. If you can position that data using simple screens, say, back to your factories or back into your supply chain, so that signals tell the factory, make more of this than the original forecast, they're much more likely to be able to respond to that unexpected demand. And the opposite's true too. If sales are below the forecast, you can take the data on what actual consumption has been and tell the plant to stop producing that particular product, change over, and make something that is going to be moving faster into the marketplace.
You know, a client, or rather a viewer of this video might say, well, yeah, this is great. I want to get started. How do I do that? So what are the best ways typically for someone to begin implementing these techniques?
Well, what we've seen is the best way to take a three-step approach. First, build consensus within your organization for how you'll transition from this push approach to this pull approach. We see it's helpful to get a workshop together with your key decision makers from supply chain management, from manufacturing, maybe your distribution centers, potentially even vendors or customers if you'd like to incorporate them into the design, and really sketch out what would the future look like in our business if we transitioned from a push to a pull approach. Once that consensus is built, it's so much easier to move on to the next step, which we recommend as a best practice to implement a pilot. Pick a fraction of one of your factories, a portion of your product mix, and demonstrate that by running with this new pull approach, you'll get much better results. Lower inventory and working capital, should have higher customer service as well. Once that pilot's done, and we're just talking a few months to make sure that the organization embraces the change and can get comfortable with the cultural differences between push and pull, what we find is you can take the success of the pilot and then scale that in the third step to additional products within that same plant, to additional links within your supply chain. And the real leading supply chain companies are finding ways to extend the pull approach downstream all the way into their customers' inventory, replenishing what's on their customers' floor or on their retail customer shelves, and upstream so that their suppliers can see inventory that's leading into their company and replenish using pull methods as well.
Well, Tom, this has been some valuable advice. Thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
You're welcome, Russell.
That's Tom Knight, Invistics, speaking with us today about best practices in a demand-driven supply chain. Thank you for watching.